Hello. How you doing? All right, settle down. Hello, my name is Saci Lloyd. I'm a writer and a teacher, and I want to talk to you a little bit today, a little bit today about a thing called the Children's Fire. So, I've been working 10, 15 years in education and writing, and in that time I've travelled a lot of places. I've travelled all around the world. I've been to many, many different institutions. I've been to private schools, and I've been to inner city schools, and I've been to bog standard comprehensives and grammar schools in the country. I've been to prisons. I've been to youth clubs. I've been to a lot of places. And my feeling after 10, 15 years is I am enraged on behalf of young people who don't get the same start in life. Because if we can't do this as a society, if we can't just start right, then what's the chance for everything else? And I want to talk a little bit about this today, about starting right and giving young people a chance. So in order to do this, I want to talk a little bit about some old ways of democracy and old ways of thinking, because it seems to me in our modern lives, there's so many advances and so many wonderful things about it, but it feels that some things are lost. And one of the things that are lost, I feel, is a deep understanding of what got us here in the first place. And if you think about human society, how did we survive for so long, for so many generations, without fur or claws or fangs? Because we took thought for ourselves. We took thought for the current generation and the generations to be, and we structured our societies in such a way that we would survive. If we thought in the way that modern society seems to think, we wouldn't have survived a few generations. And I think it's very important that we look back at some of these thoughts. So I'm going to take us back a few thousand years. I'm going to take us over the sea to Native American people and some of their thinking about how to structure society. So, at this point, you've got some elders, you've got some men and women coming together thinking, how shall we govern our people? This was the deep question. How shall we do this? And they thought, well, we are children of nature, so what we shall do is we shall look out into nature and see how nature does this. Let her teach us. And so they looked out and they saw, amongst many other things, that the primary law of all living beings was to protect the children. Because if you do not protect the children, then how can there be a future for the species? And they were like, this is the rule for every animal, every living being. The children come first because they're the future. This is not going to turn into a Gap ad. It feels a bit like, hey, it's okay. So, what they did was they made a thing called the Children's Fire, and they made a law which was no action, no law shall be passed that harms the children. And then they could continue their governing. And in order to remember this pledge, they lit a fire, and this fire was to be lit at every council meeting, at every place where important decisions for society were to be made, because it was a pledge to remind themselves that this was the core decision. Now, if we can imagine what our society might look like today if we placed the Children's Fire at the heart of every institution, every corporation, every government meeting, every education board meeting, if you could imagine every religion, if there was a Children's Fire lit in the headquarters of BP or Shell, a little one, could even be a synthetic one, maybe just there, just to remind themselves. Can you imagine how different things would be. Could you imagine that such things, such as a society where a young person of 21, 22 can be, can be saddled with 20, 30, 40,000 pounds worth of debt before they've started their lives? Could you imagine inner cities where children are literally left to form gangs and knife culture and a brutal inner city schooling system that is maybe bordering on another borough that has twice the wealth? Could you imagine such a thing to be? Could you imagine corporations thinking about the bottom line with a children's fire there? Could you imagine governments, an insane 5-year system of governments, which mean a government has to come into power, spend about 1 year making up some new policies, and then start working on re-election for itself? None of these things could happen. Could you imagine a pharmaceutical industry that won't sell its drugs to people who most need it around the world if there was a children's fire there? None of these things could happen. It is impossible to make those kind of decisions if you have a pledge to remind you that no action, no law shall be passed that harms the children. And it is so important because, as I say, how did we survive so long? Because we took thought not just for this generation, but for the future. This is the way the human species will survive the madness that we're in the 21st century. And so I want to make a call to you. It's a 2-part call. The first part is you've got to remind the fuck out of the elders. You have got to be loud, vociferous, and strong. You have to tell people that this is your future, that they have to protect you and the younger generations beneath you. Otherwise, there's no future coming. And secondly, and I think it's very hard when you're young, because I go to many, many things with young people, and I always see the same kind of speech. It's always, you are the future. You are the generation. And I always think, and I used to feel this when I was a kid, I'll be like, why are you telling me I'm the future? It's like, you're the ones with the credit cards and all the power. Why are you laying it all on me? But at a certain point, this cycle has got to stop. And that it will not take long before you become the elders, before you are making those decisions. You will all be sitting in boardrooms and in high up in your institutions making these decisions. And I say to you to start thinking in this kind of way. We have to do this, so we start putting this kind of thinking into our own lives. Imagine the act of healing on society if we start to do this. And imagine the kind of, imagine there you are, you're standing at the foot of your grave. There you are, and you look back over the trail of your life, and you see that you tried to institute, you had such bravery and courage and independence of thought to start reviving the old ways for human beings, to really, really make us the amazing species we can be. Imagine what that kind of feeling will be like. Thank you.